He was always alone in the janitor's closet, quietly eating his lunch, reading his newspaper. No one looked at him twice. Until the day an armed attacker entered the school and they saw how old Joe moved. He analyzed the situation in 3 seconds, took position in 5 seconds, neutralized the threat in 10 seconds. Only Vietnam snipers move with that speed. Welcome to Veterans Untold Stories. Before we begin this powerful story, tell us which city you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe untold veteran stories deserve to be brought to light, hit that subscribe button. These stories deserve to be remembered. Jefferson High School, in a small Ohio town, looked like an ordinary school with 1,200 students. With its 3-story brick building, wide hallways, and noisy students like every American high school, it was a typical educational institution. But in this school, there was a man no one noticed. Joseph Joe Mitchell, 68 years old, had been working as the school's janitor for the past 25 years. The words to describe Joe were always the same: quiet, reliable, invisible. He came to work every morning at 6:30 a.m. and left at 6 p.m. Never late, never early, never complained. His uniform was always clean but ordinary, his work boots worn but polished, his hair cut short but never in an attention-grabbing way. The janitor's closet was in the school's basement, a small area under the stairs. The walls were painted gray, containing an old desk, plastic chair, and coffee machine. Joe always spent his lunch breaks here, drinking his thermos coffee, reading the local newspaper, never talking to anyone. Students saw him like a ghost. When passing in the hallways, they either didn't notice him at all or said, "Hello, Mr. Joe," as they passed. He would just nod in greeting, smile, and continue his work. For 25 years, no one had asked him a personal question. No one had been interested in his past. Even the teachers knew very little about him. His personnel file contained only basic information. Joseph Mitchell, born 1955, single, no close relatives. Work references were perfect. Absenteeism, record 0. Disciplinary file clean. A perfect employee, but someone who never aroused curiosity. Joe's daily routine was methodical. He would arrive at school at 6:30 a.m., first open the main entrance, turn on the lights, check the security system. Then he would walk through each floor in order, check classrooms, empty trash cans. He made sure everything was ready before students arrived. Lunch break was the quietest time. While students were in the cafeteria, Joe would retreat to his closet, drink his thermos coffee, read his newspaper. No one disturbed these times. He was just there, like a piece of furniture. When teachers occasionally encountered him, they would have brief conversations: weather, sports results, everyday topics. Joe would give polite but short answers. He never talked about himself, never mentioned his past. School principal Margaret Thompson loved Joe. They had worked together for 15 years, and she had never received a complaint about Joe. She described him as reliable, quiet, responsible. I wish all our employees were as problem-free as Joe. But no one noticed how Joe observed the students. While cleaning, his eyes were constantly moving. He knew which students were bullies, which were victims, which corners could cause problems. This observational skill seemed natural, but it was actually the result of years of training. On that cold Wednesday in March, everything was normal. Joe had done his morning routine. Students had come to school. The first 2 classes had passed normally. There was the usual noise in the hallways. Joe was repairing an electrical panel in the basement. At exactly 10:47 a.m., a man entered through the main entrance. In his 30s, black coat, carrying a large sports bag. Secretary Jane at the reception approached him, but the man took something out of his bag, and Jane's facial expression immediately changed. At that moment, Joe was working in the basement, but something caught his attention. The sounds coming from upstairs had changed. Not normal school noise, something else. Panic sounds. Joe stopped his work and listened carefully. Running footsteps, screams, doors slamming. These sounds were familiar to him, but from 50 years ago, from Vietnam. He immediately ran to the stairs. When he reached the main floor, he saw the situation. Jane at reception had her hands up, in fear. Students in the main hallway were running in panic, and in the middle, a man with a gun. Joe's brain immediately switched to war mode. His training from 50 years ago, muscle memory, reflexes, all came back at once. In 3 seconds, he analyzed the situation. One attacker, civilian weapon, in school hallway. Approximately 30 students in danger. In 5 seconds, he took position. In the stairwell, at an angle the attacker couldn't see, with a clear line of sight. His body automatically assumed sniper position. Left shoulder supported, right hand free, breath control. In 10 seconds, he acted. He quietly approached while the attacker was shouting at students. He approached from behind. With one movement, he twisted the man's wrist, dropped the weapon, brought him to the ground. The entire operation was over in 15 seconds. Everyone around was frozen. Students, teachers, Secretary Jane. They were all looking at Joe in shock. The old janitor who had just been cleaning, who seemed quiet and harmless, had acted like a professional soldier. "Everyone stay calm," Joe said, his breathing still normal. "The danger is over. Teachers gather students in classrooms. Call the police." His tone had changed. It wasn't quiet Janitor Joe anymore, but Commander Joseph Mitchell speaking. Police arrived in 8 minutes, paramedics in 12 minutes. Joe had safely restrained the attacker, secured the crime scene. When Police Chief Daniel Rodriguez arrived, he saw Joe's professional intervention. "Who are you?" asked Chief Rodriguez. Joe just smiled. "The school janitor." "No, you're not. These movements are only—" "Old stories," Joe said. "Now only the student's safety matters." But it was obvious the mask had fallen. Principal Thompson, teachers, even some students were looking at Joe with different eyes. Who was this man? That evening, local news channels covered the story. Armed attack at Jefferson High School prevented. School janitor shows heroism. But no one knew Joe's real identity. The next day when Joe came to work, the atmosphere had changed. Students were showing him different respect. Teachers were looking with curiosity. Principal Thompson called him to her office. "Joe," said Mrs. Thompson, "what I saw yesterday wasn't normal. Who are you, really?" Joe remained silent for a long time. Then he sighed. "I guess there's no point in hiding it anymore." He told Mrs. Thompson his story. 1973 to 1975, Vietnam War, 1st Infantry Division, Sniper Unit. 127 confirmed targets, 2 Purple Heart medals, Bronze Star. Post-war PTSD, civilian adjustment problems, years of silence. "When I found this job in 1998, Joe said, I just wanted peace. Being around students, feeling like I was protecting them, this healed me." Mrs. Thompson was in shock. The man she had worked with for 25 years was a Vietnam veteran. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because I wanted to be Joe here, not Soldier Mitchell. This school gave me a new life." The news gradually spread around the school. Joe was a Vietnam veteran, but he still maintained the same humble behavior. Only now he was talking more with students, answering their questions. A week later, High school student Kevin Martinez approached him. Kevin's grandfather was also a Vietnam veteran, but never talked about the war. "Mr. Joe," Kevin said, "my grandfather also fought in Vietnam, but he never mentions it." "Why do you?" Joe looked at Kevin. "Because some memories are too heavy, son. But the most important thing is being able to use those experiences to protect others." Kevin's eyes filled up. "Would you talk to my grandfather?" Joe nodded. "Of course." That weekend, Joe met with Kevin's grandfather, Robert Martinez. Robert was 72 years old, a 1968 to 1969 Vietnam veteran. He hadn't talked about the war for 25 years. Two old men sat on a park bench, remaining silent for a long time. Finally, Robert spoke. "You were really there, weren't you?" "Yes," Joe said. "So were you. Does it ever go away?" Joe took a deep breath. But over time you learn to live with it, and you do things that make that experience meaningful." Robert wiped his eyes. "I haven't talked to anyone for 25 years. "You're talking now," Joe said. "That's a beginning." From that day on, Joe became not just the school janitor, but also an unofficial counselor. Students who were bullied came to him, veteran families sought advice, young teachers asked for help with discipline issues. But Joe still maintained the same routine. He came every morning at 6:30, did his work, spent lunch break in his closet. The only difference was that students now saw him with different eyes. One day, bully student Marcus Thompson, the principal's nephew, was bothering weak student David Kim. Joe observed the situation but didn't intervene. Instead, he spoke privately with Marcus. "Marcus," Joe said, "being strong doesn't mean crushing the weak. Being strong means protecting them." Marcus didn't listen at first. "You're just a janitor." Joe remained calm. "Yes, I'm just a janitor. But 50 years ago, I fought to protect children your age, and I still protect them." Marcus's attitude changed. He had heard Joe's story. "If I see you bothering David again," Joe continued, "we'll talk again. But it will be different this time." Marcus never bothered David again. Months passed. Joe's story spread around town. The Veterans Association wanted to make him an honorary speaker. The local newspaper wanted an interview, but Joe refused them all. "I'm just doing my job," he would say. "I don't want attention." But his job was no longer just cleaning. He had become the school's security advisor, was helping the student guidance service, giving advice to teachers on classroom management. One day, Principal Thompson called him to her office. "Joe, I want to make you an offer. The security coordinator position has opened up. Salary increase, title change, more responsibility." Joe thought about it. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, but I like being a janitor. This makes me happy. But your abilities? I'm already using my abilities in a different way." Joe decided to remain a janitor, but he was no longer just someone who cleaned. He was the school's silent guardian. During graduation season, senior student Sarah Chen wrote him a thank you letter. "Mr. Joe, for 4 years I only saw you as a janitor. But thank you for protecting our school that day, for the story I learned later. You weren't just cleaning. You were also protecting us every day. You made us feel safe." When Joe read the letter, he smiled. This was why he was here. At the end of the year, the school administration organized a special ceremony for Joe. The Jefferson High School Hero Award was given. When Joe went on stage, students gave him a standing ovation. When he approached the microphone, he didn't know what to say. He hadn't given a speech for 25 years. "Dear students," he said, "I just did my job. Protecting you, making you feel safe. This is my duty." But I want to tell you something. Real power is not harming others, but protecting them. Real courage is not looking strong, but defending the weak. There was silence in the hall. I fought 50 years ago. That experience taught me that the most valuable thing is the safety and future of the young generation. You are the reason why I'm here. The applause lasted 5 minutes. That evening when Joe returned home, he looked at the Vietnam photos hanging on his wall. Young soldier Joseph Mitchell with his comrades. Next to that photo, he hung the school photo they took that day. Janitor Joe with students. 2 different lives, but the same purpose: to protect. The next year, Joe retired, but continued working as a volunteer security advisor at school. His story became legend at Jefferson High School. It was told to new students. The name Mr. Joe was mentioned with respect. And every March 8th, on the anniversary of that incident day, the school holds a quiet ceremony. A minute of respectful silence is observed in front of Joe's photo. Because sometimes heroes aren't caped with superpowers, they just appear as a humble 72-year-old janitor. And remembering their training from 50 years ago, they protect the future. Joe's story shows that service never ends. Only its form changes. From battlefield to school hallways, from weapon to cleaning cloth. But the purpose is always the same: to protect. Now I ask you, have you ever met someone like this? Someone who appeared ordinary, but had an extraordinary past, humble but brave, quiet but strong? Share their names in the comments. Tell their stories. Because at Veterans Untold Stories, we believe that real heroes don't always stand out. Sometimes the greatest heroism comes from the most ordinary-looking veterans. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe. Help keep stories like this alive until we meet in the next video. And remember, if you ever see someone quiet at your school, workplace, or neighborhood, look twice. Maybe there's a guardian angel standing in front of you.